She is not coming with us." The words were spoken quietly, but everyone in the room heard them. Emma Carter stood near the back of the briefing room and kept her expression calm even as several heads turned in her direction. The mission board displayed maps, schedules, and weather reports, but none of that seemed to matter at the moment. What mattered was that she had been assigned to a team that did not want her there. Emma had spent years proving herself, completing every requirement placed in front of her, and earning a place among some of the most capable service members in the country. Yet the moment she entered the room, it felt as though all of that had disappeared. To several members of the team, she was not a qualified operator. She was simply the woman who had arrived at the last minute. Commander Brooks cleared his throat and continued the briefing. The assignment would begin in less than 48 hours. It required precision, discipline, and teamwork. Everyone would have a role. Everyone would be expected to perform. Emma listened carefully, taking mental notes while avoiding eye contact with the men who clearly doubted her. Across the room sat Jake Sullivan. Unlike the others, he had not joined the criticism. He had not defended her either. He simply listened. His silence was difficult to read. After the meeting ended, conversations filled the hallway. Some team members discussed logistics. Others discussed equipment. A few discussed Emma. She heard enough to understand exactly what they thought. They believed she lacked experience. They believed she would slow the team down. They believed someone else should have received the assignment. Emma continued walking without responding. Experience had taught her that arguments rarely changed opinions. Results did. Later that afternoon, the team gathered for preparation exercises. Emma completed every task with focus and consistency. She did not try to impress anyone. She simply did her job. Even so, every mistake made by someone else seemed to disappear, while every small detail involving her received extra attention. The atmosphere remained tense. As the sun began to set, the team was dismissed. Emma sat alone outside the barracks, watching the orange light fade beyond the training grounds. For the first time that day, she allowed herself a moment of honesty. The mission had not even started, yet she already felt isolated. She knew she could request reassignment. She knew she could walk away from a situation that seemed determined to reject her. Instead, she looked toward the distant lights of the base and remembered why she had chosen this path. She had never joined to earn approval. She had joined to serve, to grow, and to prove to herself that difficult things were worth doing. Footsteps approached from behind. Emma turned and saw Jake. He stopped a few feet away and looked toward the horizon. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Finally, Jake broke the silence. "For what it is worth," he said, "the mission starts in 2 days. Nobody knows how it ends." Then he walked away before she could answer. Emma watched him disappear into the darkness and considered his words. Maybe he was right. Maybe the story everyone thought they understood had not actually begun yet. The next morning began before sunrise, and the entire team assembled on the training field beneath a cold gray sky. The mission was now less than 24 hours away, and every operator understood that preparation could make the difference between success and failure. Emma arrived early, carrying her gear and reviewing the schedule in silence. She noticed that most of the team had already formed small groups. Conversations flowed naturally among people who had worked together for years. She remained on the outside, close enough to hear them, but never truly included. The first exercise focused on navigation and coordination. Small teams were assigned a series of checkpoints spread across several miles of rugged terrain. The objective was simple: reach every location within a strict time limit while maintaining communication and accuracy. Emma was assigned to a group that included Jake and 2 other operators named Ryan and Cole. Neither man appeared happy about the arrangement. As the exercise began, Ryan immediately assumed leadership and started issuing instructions. Emma listened carefully and followed every direction. For the first hour, everything moved smoothly. Then a problem emerged. One of the coordinates provided to the team did not match the terrain they were seeing. Ryan insisted they continue east. Emma studied the map again and noticed a discrepancy between the printed route and the updated satellite imagery attached to the mission packet. She quietly pointed it out. Ryan barely glanced at her suggestion before dismissing it. "We are staying on the planned route," he said. Emma nodded and said nothing further. 20 minutes later, the team reached a dead end that forced them to backtrack nearly half a mile. Nobody said a word, but everyone understood what had happened. Emma could have reminded them of her warning. Instead, She simply helped identify the correct path and continued forward. Jake noticed. Throughout the remainder of the exercise, he found himself paying closer attention to her observations. She never raised her voice. She never complained. She never tried to embarrass anyone. She simply focused on solving problems. By late afternoon, the team moved into a simulated planning scenario designed to test decision-making under pressure. Multiple groups presented solutions to a fictional crisis. During Emma's presentation, several members of the team challenged her recommendations before she had even finished explaining them. Yet as questions became more detailed, her answers remained clear and confident. Even Commander Brooks seemed impressed. After the session ended, the team gathered near the equipment storage area. The atmosphere felt slightly different. The criticism had not disappeared, but the certainty behind it had begun to weaken. For the first time, some of the operators seemed unsure of their assumptions. As Emma packed her gear, she overheard two teammates discussing the navigation exercise. One admitted that she had spotted the mistake long before anyone else. The comment was brief, but it was the first positive thing she had heard since arriving. As evening settled across the base, Jake approached her again. This time he did not leave immediately. "You could have called Ryan out in front of everyone," he said. Emma shrugged. That would not have helped the team. Jake studied her expression for a moment. Most people would have taken the opportunity. Emma looked toward the fading sunlight beyond the training grounds. "I am not here to win arguments," she replied. "I am here to do the job." Jake nodded slowly. For the first time since she had joined the unit, he felt that there was much more to Emma Carter than anyone had bothered to see. And somewhere inside the team, doubts that had seemed unshakable only a day earlier were beginning to crack. By dawn the following day, the atmosphere across the base had changed. The mission was no longer something waiting in the future. It had become real. Equipment was inspected one final time, transportation schedules were confirmed, and every member of the team understood that within hours they would be operating far from the comfort and predictability of home. Emma moved through the preparation process with the same quiet focus she had displayed since arriving. She checked her gear twice, reviewed the mission packet again, and listened carefully during the final briefing. Yet despite everything that had happened during training, she could still feel the distance between herself and much of the team. The doubts were not gone. They had simply become quieter. Commander Brooks stood at the front of the room and outlined the operational plan. The objective required the team to reach a remote region, establish contact with a partner unit, and assist with a sensitive assignment involving surveillance and information gathering. Timing would be critical. Communication would be essential. Mistakes could create serious complications for everyone involved. As the briefing continued, Emma noticed several operators exchanging glances whenever her name appeared beside a responsibility. Nobody openly challenged the assignment, but the skepticism remained visible. When the meeting ended, the team dispersed to prepare for departure. Emma gathered her notes and headed toward the exit when she heard her name. Turning around, she saw Commander Brooks motioning for her to stay. Once the room emptied, he closed the door and walked over to the large map displayed on the wall. For several moments he studied it without speaking. Finally, he looked at Emma. "You know, some people still question this assignment," he said. Emma nodded. "Yes, sir." Brooks folded his arms. "Does it bother you?" Emma considered the question carefully. "It would be easier if they trusted me," she answered. "But trust is earned." A faint smile appeared on the commander's face. "That is exactly why you are here." Before Emma could respond, Brooks handed her a folder containing updated mission details. "Focus on the job," he said. "Everything else will take care of itself." Later that afternoon, the team boarded transport for the first stage of deployment. The long journey gave everyone time to think. Some slept. Others reviewed documents or listened to music. Emma spent most of the flight studying regional maps and weather forecasts. Across the aisle, Jake occasionally glanced in her direction. The more he observed her, the more confused he became by the opinions surrounding her. She never demanded attention. She never tried to prove herself through words. Yet she seemed more prepared than many people who openly questioned her. Several hours later, after a refueling stop, the team gathered near the aircraft before continuing their journey. As they waited, Ryan approached Jake. "You still think Brooks made the right call?" he asked quietly. Jake looked toward Emma, who was reviewing notes near a cargo container. "I think we will find out soon enough," he replied. Ryan shook his head. "I hope so." The conversation ended there, but Jake found himself wondering whether everyone had been asking the wrong question from the beginning. Maybe the issue was not whether Emma belonged on the mission. Maybe the real question was why so many people were determined to believe she did not. As the team prepared to depart once again, dark clouds gathered along the horizon, and none of them realized that the first true test of the mission was much closer than anyone expected. The transport finally touched down just after sunrise, and the team stepped into an environment far different from the controlled routines of the base. The air was dry, the terrain stretched for miles in every direction, and the distant mountains seemed to rise straight out of the horizon. After a brief coordination meeting with the partner unit, the team moved to a temporary operations center where they would spend the next several days supporting the mission. The assignment required patience more than speed. Information had to be gathered carefully, routes had to be verified, and every movement had to be planned with precision. During the first day, Emma focused entirely on her responsibilities. She reviewed maps, checked communication procedures, and helped organize incoming reports. Although she remained professional, she could still sense the barriers separating her from some of the others. Ryan and Cole were polite, but their conversations rarely included her unless necessary. Jake remained respectful yet distant, still observing more than participating. By the second day, the team began conducting field operations across a wide area. Small groups were assigned different tasks, and schedules constantly shifted as new information arrived. During one afternoon briefing, an unexpected problem emerged. Several route markers used by the team no longer matched updated satellite data. The discrepancy created confusion because multiple plans had been built around those coordinates. The room quickly filled with competing opinions. Different operators proposed different solutions, and frustration began to grow. Emma studied the information carefully. After several minutes, she noticed a pattern that everyone else had overlooked. A recent weather event had altered portions of the terrain, causing the original references to become unreliable. She quietly explained her findings and suggested an alternative route. For a moment, the room fell silent. Several people reviewed the data again. One by one, they realized she was correct. Commander Brooks immediately approved the revised plan. Nobody openly celebrated the discovery, but something important changed. For the first time since arriving, Emma had solved a problem that affected the entire team, and she had done it using preparation rather than luck. Later that evening, Jake found her outside the operations center reviewing additional reports. "You saw something the rest of us missed," he said. Emma looked up and offered a small smile. "I just paid attention to the details." Jake shook his head. "Most people say that after the fact. You actually did it." For the first time, their conversation felt natural rather than cautious. They spent nearly 20 minutes discussing the mission, their training experiences, and the challenges of adapting to new teams. Emma discovered that Jake was less confident than he appeared. Years of responsibility had taught him to hide uncertainty behind professionalism. Jake discovered that Emma possessed a quiet sense of humor that rarely appeared during formal briefings. As the conversation continued, both seemed surprised by how easily it flowed. The next morning brought another challenge. A sudden communication issue disrupted contact between several teams operating across the region. Confusion spread quickly as personnel attempted to verify information through alternate channels. Once again, Emma remained calm. Instead of focusing on the growing frustration around her, she worked methodically through available data until she identified the source of the problem. Her recommendation restored coordination far sooner than expected. Even Ryan was forced to acknowledge the result. "Good catch," he said before walking away. The words were brief, but they mattered. Emma noticed them. So did Jake. As the days passed, trust began forming in places where doubt had once dominated. Yet while the team grew more confident, none of them realized that events already unfolding beyond their immediate view would soon place that trust under a far greater test than any training exercise or planning meeting ever could. The warning arrived just before dawn. A field team operating several miles from the main operations center reported unexpected complications and requested immediate support. The message itself was brief, but the urgency behind it was impossible to miss. Within minutes, Commander Brooks assembled the team and began assigning responsibilities. Maps were spread across tables, communication channels were activated, and every available piece of information was reviewed. The situation remained unclear, which made it even more concerning. Emma stood alongside the others as Brooks explained the details. A small group had been gathering information in a remote area when severe weather and difficult terrain disrupted their planned route. Contact had become intermittent. Their last confirmed location was several miles from the nearest support position. The objective was simple: re-establish communication and bring everyone back safely. As preparations began, Jake was assigned to an advance element responsible for reaching the area first. Ryan and Cole would support from another route. Emma was placed on the coordination team responsible for monitoring updates and adjusting plans as new information arrived. Although nobody openly questioned the decision, Emma sensed disappointment. She wanted to be closer to the operation. Instead, she accepted her assignment and focused on the task at hand. Hours passed as reports arrived from multiple directions. Conditions in the area continued to change, creating new obstacles for everyone involved. Communication remained unreliable. Every update seemed to answer one question while creating two more. Throughout the morning, Emma studied incoming information and began noticing inconsistencies in several location reports. The coordinates being transmitted did not align with weather patterns, travel times, or terrain data. Something was wrong. She reviewed the reports again and again until a possibility emerged. The team in the field might not be where everyone believed they were. When she presented her analysis, several operators hesitated. The original coordinates had already shaped the response effort. Changing direction now could cost valuable time. Commander Brooks listened carefully before asking Emma to explain her reasoning. She walked through every detail step by step. By the time she finished, the room had grown quiet. The evidence was difficult to ignore. Brooks immediately ordered a review. Within 30 minutes, updated calculations confirmed Emma's assessment. The field team had likely been moving along a different route than originally expected. The discovery changed everything. New instructions were sent to all units. Resources were repositioned. Search areas were adjusted. For the first time that day, progress seemed possible. Late that afternoon, another message finally arrived. The advance element had reached the general area and established limited contact. Relief spread through the operations center. Yet the update contained troubling news. Jake had become separated from the rest of his group while attempting to navigate difficult terrain during the search effort. Communication with him had been lost. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the information. Ryan stared at the map. Cole lowered his head. Commander Brooks immediately began organizing the next phase of the response. Emma felt her stomach tighten. Jake was experienced, disciplined, and capable. If contact had been lost, there was a reason. As plans developed around her, she found herself looking toward the last known location marked on the map. For days, trust had slowly begun to grow between them. Now, without warning, that fragile connection had become something far more personal. And as darkness settled across the region, one question remained unanswered. Where was Jake Sullivan, and how much time remained before someone found him? The operations center remained active throughout the night. Maps covered every available surface. Communications specialists monitored incoming channels, and teams rotated through planning sessions without pause. Nobody wanted to admit it aloud, but concern for Jake was growing with each passing hour. The limited information they possessed painted an incomplete picture. His last known position had been recorded during difficult weather conditions, and subsequent attempts to establish reliable contact had produced nothing useful. Commander Brooks reviewed every available option. Search teams were already moving into position, but the terrain slowed progress and reduced visibility. Every decision required careful consideration. Emma sat at a table near the center of the room, studying the same reports for what felt like the 100th time. Something continued to bother her. The official search plan made sense based on the available information, yet several details refused to fit together. She examined travel estimates, elevation changes, weather patterns, and previous route selections. Gradually, a new possibility began to emerge. Jake had always preferred efficiency. During training exercises and planning discussions, he consistently favored routes that balanced speed with safety. If conditions had changed unexpectedly, he would likely have adapted rather than continued along the original path. Emma pulled additional maps from a nearby cabinet and compared them to recent satellite imagery. What she discovered immediately caught her attention. A narrow passage connecting two sections of terrain appeared difficult to identify on older maps, but remained passable according to the latest updates. If Jake had noticed the same feature, it could explain several inconsistencies in the reports. Emma approached Commander Brooks and presented her findings. Several members of the team listened as she explained her reasoning. Some remained skeptical. Others appeared uncertain. Ryan crossed his arms and studied the map carefully. That area was not included in the original search sector, he said. Exactly, Emma replied. That is why nobody has checked it thoroughly. Brooks examined the information in silence. Finally, he looked up. How confident are you? Emma took a breath. Confident enough to believe we are looking in the wrong place. The room became quiet. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Brooks nodded. Adjust the search plan. The order surprised several people, but nobody argued. Within minutes, updated instructions were transmitted to the field teams. As preparations continued, Emma remained focused on the maps. She understood that she could be wrong. The responsibility weighed heavily on her shoulders. If her assessment proved inaccurate, valuable time would be lost. Yet every instinct told her the new direction was correct. Hours passed. Reports arrived slowly. The operations center settled into an uneasy rhythm of waiting and analysis. Then, shortly after sunrise, a message appeared on one of the communication screens. A search element operating near the revised sector had discovered evidence confirming recent movement through the area. The information immediately energized the entire room. Ryan looked toward Emma with an expression she had never seen before. It was not doubt. It was respect. Additional updates followed. The search teams were now narrowing their focus. For the first time since Jake disappeared, the operation felt as though it was moving toward an answer. Emma tried to remain calm, but relief mixed with anxiety inside her. The possibility of finding him had suddenly become real. As activity increased around her, Commander Brooks stepped beside her table. Good work, he said quietly. Emma nodded but kept her eyes on the map. We still have not found him. Brooks followed her gaze. No, he replied. But because you spoke up, we finally know where to look. And as another message arrived from the field, indicating that contact might be closer than anyone had expected, Emma realized that the next few hours could change everything for the team, for Jake, and perhaps for her as well. The next report arrived shortly after midday, and the entire operations center seemed to pause as communication specialists verified the information. A search team moving through the revised sector had discovered clear signs that someone had recently passed through the area. The evidence matched the timeline of Jake's disappearance. For the first time in nearly 2 days, uncertainty began giving way to cautious optimism. Commander Brooks immediately redirected additional resources toward the location while analysts worked to predict the most likely routes Jake could have followed afterward. Emma remained focused on the maps spread across the table before her. Even with encouraging news, she knew the situation was far from resolved. Finding evidence was not the same as finding a person. Every hour still mattered. Throughout the afternoon, communication traffic increased. Search elements reported terrain conditions, weather updates, and observations from multiple sectors. Emma listened carefully, comparing every new detail against the patterns she had identified earlier. Gradually, a larger picture started to emerge. The movement indicators suggested that Jake had continued heading toward an area that offered better shelter and easier navigation. It was exactly the kind of practical decision she believed he would make. When she shared the assessment, several team members immediately agreed. The growing confidence in her analysis felt strange. Only days earlier, many of the same people had questioned whether she belonged on the mission at all. Now they were asking for her opinion before making decisions. As the search continued, Ryan approached her station carrying a fresh set of reports. I think you should see these first, he said. The statement surprised her. It was a small gesture, but it represented something important. Trust was beginning to replace skepticism. Emma reviewed the documents and quickly noticed another useful detail. Weather conditions in one section of the area had remained more stable than expected, increasing the likelihood that someone traveling alone would choose that route. The information was immediately passed to the teams in the field. Hours later, just as the sun began lowering toward the horizon, a transmission finally arrived that changed everything. A search element had established contact. The signal was weak and intermittent, but it was enough. Jake had been located. Relief swept through the operations center. Several people exchanged smiles. Others simply closed their eyes for a moment and exhaled. Commander Brooks thanked the field teams and immediately began coordinating the recovery effort. Emma remained silent as she listened to the updates. She felt a wave of relief unlike anything she had experienced since arriving. The uncertainty that had occupied her thoughts for days was finally beginning to fade. The recovery operation continued into the evening. Progress was slow because of terrain and weather, but communication remained steady. With every update, confidence grew. Jake was safe. He was cooperating with recovery teams. He would soon be reunited with the unit. As darkness settled across the region, the atmosphere inside the operations center transformed completely. People who had spent days carrying stress and concern finally allowed themselves to relax. Ryan even stopped by Emma's table before leaving for the night. "You were right," he said. "About all of it." Emma looked up, unsure how to respond. Ryan smiled slightly. "I should have listened sooner." After he walked away, Emma sat quietly for a moment. The words mattered more than she expected. Not because she needed recognition, but because they represented something she had been working toward since the day she arrived. Respect had not been given to her. It had been earned. And as another message confirmed that Jake would be returning to base operations the following morning, Emma realized that the story between them, and perhaps the future of the entire team, was only beginning to take shape. The following morning began with a level of anticipation that nobody tried to hide. For nearly 2 days, the entire operation had revolved around uncertainty, planning, and hope. Now, for the first time, there was a clear outcome in sight. Updates from the recovery team confirmed that Jake was on his way back to the operations center. Conditions remained challenging, but the hardest part was finally behind them. Personnel who had spent hours studying maps and communication reports now found themselves checking the clock more often than their equipment. Even Commander Brooks appeared more relaxed than he had in days. Emma tried to focus on her work, but she quickly realized that concentration was difficult. Every time a new vehicle arrived or a radio message came through, her attention shifted toward the possibility that Jake had returned. She reminded herself that her concern was professional. He was a teammate, a friend, someone whose absence had affected the entire unit. Yet deep down she knew there was more to it than that. Somewhere during the long days of preparation, problem-solving, and uncertainty, her respect for him had quietly grown into something more personal. Shortly after noon, the recovery team finally arrived. The operations center immediately became active as personnel welcomed them back and gathered reports from the field. Jake stepped inside looking tired but otherwise well. Conversations paused as people noticed him. Several teammates crossed the room to shake his hand. Others simply smiled with visible relief. Ryan was among the first to greet him. After a brief exchange, Jake's attention shifted across the room and settled on Emma. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Jake walked over. "Looks like you found me," he said with a tired smile. Emma folded her arms and raised an eyebrow. "You make it sound like getting lost was part of the plan." Jake laughed quietly. "Fair point." The simple conversation felt surprisingly natural. For days, circumstances had forced both of them to focus on the mission. Now that the immediate pressure had passed, they finally had a chance to speak without interruption. Later that afternoon, Commander Brooks gathered the entire team for a formal review of the operation. Everyone expected a discussion about procedures, communication, and lessons learned. Instead, the meeting quickly took a different direction. Brooks stood before the group and reviewed the sequence of events that had led to the successful recovery effort. One by one, he highlighted critical decisions that contributed to the outcome. Several team members received recognition for their work. Then he turned toward Emma. The room became silent. Brooks explained how her analysis had identified errors in the original assumptions, redirected search efforts, and ultimately led teams toward the correct location. He made it clear that without her observations, the outcome could have been very different. Nobody interrupted. Nobody questioned his assessment. The respect in the room was genuine. When Brooks finished speaking, something unexpected happened. Ryan stood and addressed the group. He openly admitted that he had doubted Emma from the beginning. He acknowledged that his assumptions had been wrong and thanked her for remaining professional despite the skepticism she had faced. The honesty of the moment surprised everyone. For Emma, it felt like the final weight of the past week lifting from her shoulders. After the meeting ended, People approached her one after another. Some offered congratulations. Others simply thanked her. The woman who had arrived as an outsider was now being treated as a trusted member of the team. As evening settled across the operations center, Emma stepped outside to enjoy a rare moment of quiet. A few minutes later, she heard familiar footsteps behind her. She did not need to turn around to know who it was. Jake stopped beside her and looked toward the distant mountains. "You know," he said, "I spent a lot of time thinking while I was waiting to be found." Emma smiled slightly. "And?" Jake looked at her for a moment before answering. "And I realized there are some things I should have said much sooner." Emma turned toward Jake and studied his expression. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The noise of the operations center faded into the background as the evening air settled across the base. Jake rested his hands on the railing beside them and looked toward the mountains one last time before facing her again. "When I first met you," he said, "I thought staying neutral was the right thing to do. I did not question the assumptions people made because I told myself I did not have enough information." Emma listened quietly. "And now?" she asked. Jake smiled faintly. "Now I think I should have paid attention sooner." Emma looked away for a second, unsure how to respond. Over the past several days, she had fought to earn the respect of people who had already decided who she was before getting to know her. She had accepted the challenge because she believed actions mattered more than opinions. Yet hearing Jake say those words felt different. It was not about recognition. It was about honesty. "You were not the only one who had doubts," Emma admitted. "I was not sure this team would ever accept me." Jake laughed softly. "After everything that happened, I do not think anyone is questioning that anymore." The following days passed quickly. The operation entered its final phase, and the team completed its remaining responsibilities with a level of unity that had been absent when the mission began. Conversations became easier. Cooperation became natural. The barriers that once divided the group seemed to disappear entirely. Emma found herself included in planning discussions, informal conversations, and team decisions without anyone thinking twice about it. Even Ryan, who had once been her strongest critic, regularly asked for her opinion. One afternoon, as the team prepared reports for headquarters, Commander Brooks gathered everyone together. He thanked them for their professionalism and dedication throughout the mission. Then he addressed Emma directly. He spoke about leadership, perseverance, and the importance of maintaining confidence when others failed to see your value. The room responded with genuine applause. Emma felt her face grow warm. She had never sought attention, yet the respect behind the gesture meant more than she could express. A week later, the mission officially concluded. The team boarded transport for the journey home. Unlike the flight that had brought them there, this one felt completely different. Conversations filled the cabin. Laughter appeared where tension once existed. Emma sat beside the window watching the clouds pass below while reflecting on everything that had changed. She had arrived feeling isolated and unwanted. She was leaving as a trusted member of the team. At one point during the flight, Jake moved into the empty seat beside her. They spent hours talking about family, future plans, and the unexpected paths that had shaped their lives. The conversation felt effortless. Neither of them needed to pretend to be someone else. When the aircraft finally landed back in the United States, the familiar sight of home brought a sense of peace to everyone on board. As the team collected their gear and prepared to go their separate ways, Jake stopped beside Emma. "Would you like to get dinner sometime when things settle down?" he asked. Emma smiled. "I was beginning to wonder if you were ever going to ask." Jake laughed, and for the first time since they met, there was no uncertainty between them. The mission had started with doubt, distance, and assumptions. It ended with trust, friendship, and the beginning of something neither of them had expected. As they walked toward the exit together, Emma realized that the greatest victory had never been proving people wrong. It had been discovering exactly who she was when everything around her challenged her to give up.